Hey, this is Jason here with Divine Frustrations, and I just wanted to respond to a frustration that I received from an individual who apparently has a lot of experience in churches. And so, what this gentleman said was that his frustration had to do with what he described as the weird tone of voice that preachers use, particularly when they are preaching a sermon in the pulpit. And he described it in some, concerning language, described it as a fake representation of the way we communicate, that the preacher is just role playing, and that the way they use their tone and the way they present themselves is somewhat condescending. And he concluded by saying that what this all reveals is that when this is happening, that preachers are really just in it for the money, and they are essentially putting up a show, and they're not really communicating in the way that the average everyday person does. So, how would I respond to that? Well, first thing I would say is that the underlying issue from this individual seems to be that there is a desire for authenticity, especially in the context of church experiences. And we know that sometimes that is present, sometimes it's not. But this individual, of course, has a gripe with what he has experienced in these settings, perhaps in person as well as even online. So, of course, authenticity is something that we all value, we all cherish it, and something that we should all display in our lives. And it seems as though what he's saying is that that's just not the case. So, let's suppose that he's right and that there are instances where the pastor, the preacher, whoever it is communicating or presenting themselves in a way that does not represent genuine authenticity. Well, a couple of different things can be done. Number one, that individual can be prayed for because for whatever reason, if they are, putting up this front in front of other people, or maybe they're just in a mode where they communicate a certain way, well, that's them. And maybe one of the things that could help if that's what's taking place is praying, maybe that God will open their eyes and help them to see the situation for what it really is. Another consideration is that we want to be careful with not overemphasizing the style of the individual and not focusing so much on the content or the substance. And so, yes, the style of the individual may come across as being somewhat disingenuous, and, it may seem or may appear to be what this individual said, which was fake and role playing. So it may come across like that. It may also be that that's just this person's style. This is the way that they communicate when they're in that particular mode or when they're doing what they're doing. So, same thing. If that's the case, that individual can be prayed for. And if they are doing the work of the Lord, if they are seeking to proclaim the word, if they're seeking to honor God with their lives, then there are at least those positive elements that can be taken into consideration. Lastly, and I would say perhaps most seriously, is the individual has a few options. If they are ultimately disgruntled with what they are receiving from the spokesman of that location, then they have a couple of different options. They can have a conversation with the individual, and that conversation in which they can share whatever concerns they have. If there really is enough authenticity there, and if there's enough brotherhood between the believers and the preacher and the pastor, then they may be able to have a conversation about whatever the concern might be. And if it comes down to it, the person also has the option of leaving. Now, we can talk about whether or not a person should leave a church on the basis of having some concerns about the tone in which the preacher uses when they are speaking. But if it grieves the person to that extent, well, then that is a realistic option. Not every church has a pastor where they talk in the exact same way. You have some that may speak in the way in which this individual was expressing their concerns. And you may have others who speak in a totally different manner that may seem more genuine and may not have some of the same elements of criticism that are presented by this individual. So, in a nutshell, I would say that whether it's the tone of voice, whether there's some other dynamic that is a source of tension for an individual listening to a preacher or pastor, one of the things that can be done is pray for them, consider the good that the individual is doing, what they represent, and think about the substance of the individual and not just the style in which they communicate. And if it really comes down to it, and if this is something that the person cannot get past for whatever reason, they have an option to peacefully leave. And maybe they will find themselves at a location where they have a little bit more trust and a little bit more fondness in the preacher at a different church. So, again, I hope this is helpful. If you have any other frustrations, if there's something else you would like to share after listening to this, or if you have a comment on it, feel free to share that. You could also share it on my website, www.divinefrustrations.com, and I can follow up with you in that way as well. Thank you, and God bless you.